The presenting partner of today's episode is Sexton Speakers, Australia's leading speakers bureau. At Sexton, they know that the right speaker can be the most powerful part of any event, leaving a lasting impression that sticks with your audiences long after the final applause. With decades of experience, Sexton's team will match you with your perfect speaker, MC, or entertainer to elevate your event, delivering energy, insight, and inspiration like no else. Partner with Sexton and give your audience an experience they'll never forget.
But those that I think did better or look back on it as a more positive experience were the ones that set out on an adventure, that part of their journey to Antarctica wasn't just, oh, it's a job or it's something interesting or I just want to go and see penguins or whatever it is, your bucket listers. And we get them in the program and everyone's got a slice of their motivational wagon wheel that's bucket list of like, cool, go to Antarctica. But you want a bigger part of that wagon wheel to be pure, I want a professional and individual and group adventure. And for those of the team that saw that, when it got harder or when it became this, hey, you're staying longer, you're now going to end up being on one of the longest Australian Antarctic expeditions in modern history, with all these different twists and turns along the way, when your motivation was, hey, I wanted an adventure. And this helped me on some dark days where you're like, you wanted to be a leader in a tough situation. Well, geez, well, you wanted this, you idiot. So deal with it.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Our guest today is an Antarctic expedition leader who found himself stranded there for over 500 days. Now, I don't know about you, but I was born in the tropics. I've been to the snow once, and the thought of spending over 500 days in Antarctica, not knowing when I was going to get home, with 24 other people is not an experience I would really sign up for. In 2019, David Knoff was given a leadership challenge unlike no other in modern history, as the station leader at Davis Station, Antarctica. He was leading a team of just 24 through the isolation of an Antarctic winter when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. The impact of the pandemic on the Antarctic operations saw David's team without a ride home as planned and facing one of the longest periods of isolation in modern Antarctic history. So what is it like to lead an Antarctic expedition for 537 days, including nearly an entire year without resupply, whilst watching a global pandemic unfold from afar? The incredible story of how David and his team endured the harsh environment and the complex human experience of facing uncertainty and adversity as the days, weeks, and months tick by, and what it was like to return to a changed world. From an extended stay, a complex and daring medical evacuation, and finally a shipboard fire just days away from returning home, pushed everyone to the limits of human resilience. David's story and book, 537 Days of Winter, is a story unlike any other modern Antarctic history. He joins us today to share some of his experiences and what it took as a leader to get his team through the 537 days. The book is out in all bookstores, and this conversation today has been brought to us by Sexton Speakers. Please enjoy this fabulous conversation with David Knoff. Well, good morning, David. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today? Happy Monday morning.
Happy Monday morning. What a great way to start the week with a podcast.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. Now, in my research, when I was researching prior to this conversation, I note that you've been an infantry commander, a station leader in Antarctica, You've spent time in Iraq and Pakistan. They're all uniform roles. What made you go into that lifestyle?
Well, not all uniforms. I mean, in Antarctica, we were brightly coloured Gore-Tex coats and stuff.
I have seen that online, yes.
Somewhat of a uniform, but not necessarily a spotty one. I've always, I don't know, there's a structure to it all, and it certainly gets you to a lot of locations that, yes, there is civilian work, or there is sort of more traditional career work, for want of a better word. But I from not from an early age, but from around my mid-teens and into university, I was really interested in international relations and global affairs, and started to read up on everything that was happening in around. After 9/11 was probably had an impact on that. You know, that happened when I was in year 11 at high school. And really then there was the big focus on, okay, we're going to go to war in Afghanistan. And then by 2003, we're at war in Iraq. And all of that happened when I was finishing school and going to university. So that had a big role in shaping kind of my outlook of the world, and the world's media and attention was all really focused on global issues. And so that probably shaped it. And rather than just keep reading about it in books or studying it at university like I was doing, I wanted to get out there and be part of international relations and global politics. And the best way to do that, certainly when I was, my first foray into it all, easiest way to do that was through the military in uniform, and was lucky enough to lead a platoon of soldiers over in the Solomon Islands back in 2007 as part of the regional peacekeeping mission there, which is like low threat in terms of war. Like it certainly wasn't a war. It was a peacekeeping operation, and a great way to work with the local government and working with some partner Pacific nations. So it wasn't just Australians and Kiwis as we always deploy, but we had Papua New Guineans, Tongans, Fijians, and everyone as well. It gave it this great Pacific Islands vibe. And that was something that I went, okay, this is great. I want to do this, and not necessarily in a camouflage uniform. And after that, switched to foreign affairs and trade, and worked in a I guess a suit uniform with the rest of the Australia's diplomatic community and around the world.
I'll make a confession to you. I was actually born in Fiji, so I know what you mean about the Pacific way of doing things. You spend some time. I know. I mean, you see them all singing their songs and everything else, and it's a beautiful experience. But
I have a great story on that. With when we were doing our lead up training to deploy on that trip, we were up in Townsville. And at that point, we had the Fijians or Tongans or Papua New Guineans or something. We had one of the other groups. I think it was the Tongans with us. And they used to sing every night. So they'd sit around, they'd drink kava, and they'd sing. And we just sort of, if we're allowed to, we'd have a couple of beers, and that would be it. And I got the platoon together one night. We went on this hike. So we're out, a couple of Ks into the bush, supposed to be doing like platoon activities. And I stopped everyone. I said, right, we're going to stop. We're going to dedicate an hour. We're going to do a song session, so that tonight when the Tongans sing their song, we're going to reply and we're all going to sing a song. So we quickly did a poll, and they were like a few grunts of like, oh, what kind of stupid idea is this? I'm like, we're doing it. We've got, Australians got no culture, and we're doing it. And then anyway, so we picked Waltzing Matilda, and then we spent an hour out in the bush practicing to get our Waltzing Matilda down pat. And then that night at the boozer, when the Tongans there were there, and we kind of got together, they sang a couple of their songs, and I kind of got up and said, hey, just going to pause you there. We're now going to give you a demonstration of our musical abilities. And it was a great moment to kind of bring everyone together, and that was a funny little.
Did you ever try the kava? I have to ask you that question.
Yeah, it tastes like muddy water. But yeah. And then a beetle nut, I could never get my mouth around that one as well.
Yeah. No. Pakistan and Iraq would have been very different to your experience in the Solomon Islands. Talk to me about how different that was for you.
Yeah, correct. I mean, Pakistan, I was there for a few years, around like pretty much the height of our war in Afghanistan. So that really dominated our focus over there. We're working, again, with the Pakistani government and with the international government against terrorism. So I worked more on counter-radicalization and de-radicalization programs, and it was a tricky one. Certainly on those topics, we worked very closely with the Pakistani government. They were very cooperative. We had a lot of joint training programs and a lot of joint initiatives and a lot of joint investigations and other aspects as well. And that was fascinating in itself, but it was also fascinating to be in a country where there were a lot of regions that were very, very dangerous, that we either could travel to in restricted ways in armored vehicles with armed escorts and all sorts of stuff. So there was a lot of regions that were quite dangerous. And yet at the same time, there was almost no region of the country that was untouched by terrorism. So every day there was attacks somewhere. There was also a day, every day, millions and millions of people go to work and live and play and live happy lives. So it had a strange dynamic to it, and it was certainly a beautiful country to get around and travel up to the north into the Himalaya and Karakoram ranges and down. Like it's a beautiful country. It had a lot of problems and still does in terms of its place. And then going into Iraq as well, you have this strange identity crisis of Western culture and I guess global history. You have this understanding of you're looking at it we're looking at it in kind of a post 9/11 anti-Taliban Al-Qaeda network kind of dismantling operation and the fight against that. Yet the history of conflict in those regions just goes so far back, and you're looking at the partition of India and Pakistan, and that was great as well to go and visit India and visit Nepal and kind of get your head around and go up to Kashmir. Got to go up to Kashmir a few times, and you get this strange sense of like, geez, we've drawn a lot of lines on maps here, and then you meet the cultures on both sides, and you go, well, for thousands and thousands of years, you were all family, and then some lines have been drawn on maps, either by Western cultures or by your own. Then, the same thing in Iraq, you're looking at, again, lines drawn on maps at the end of the First World War that now lead to, and the way we always look at those regions is through those maps, and you just go, they're so inaccurate. They don't take into account so many different changes and cultures and histories, and then you even go, well, which map do you go with? You're like, well, there's no map that is perfect, because over centuries and millennia, those borders and cultures and civilizations have come and gone and changed, and there's linguistic and ethnic groups in there, but they've all mixed as well. So it's a fascinating part, and you just sit there and go, well, this is just our little part of it. And I had another great story once. I was explaining it to I'd at this point been in Iraq about a year or so. We were working with Kiwis and French and Italians and Americans, of course, and Canadians and British and all sorts of different coalition troops. But we were embedded with a Kiwi and Australian Anzac task group, and fighting ISIS was the main purpose there. Working with the Iraqi government to defeat ISIS, push them out, and restore the colonial borders that had been drawn for Iraq. But anyway, the new rotation of Kiwis came in. They had some briefings on the whole history of the region, but not that many. And you've just got this like couple of dudes out of Dunedin or wherever it is, and all of a sudden they're now in the middle of a centuries old conflict, and just having to drive along in the car, hooning around northern Baghdad, and just explaining. Okay, so it starts like we're going to start with the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the delineation of Iraq and Syria and all that, the First World War. However, if we've got time, I'll go back to ancient Samaria and we'll start there and go with the cradle of civilization. And these guys are just sitting there going like,
what is he talking about?
Yeah, what is it? What have we got ourselves into? So anyway.
You've had such a diverse experience. When you look at your time in Australia, Solomon Islands, Iraq, Pakistan, and all the experiences. I mean, I've never heard anyone who's been in those places actually acknowledge the history like you have just done. But I'm intrigued to find out, what leadership lessons have all of those experiences taught you? Because you've just reflected on the culture of countries that go back a millennia, and we're looking at it from a very Western lens, and then you come back into your Western life. What leadership lessons have those experiences taught you?
I think that the lesson is pretty evident there in terms of leading the cultures that you lead. And I always say, I have a mantra of lead the team you've got for the situation you face, because you'll never have the perfect team. And it speaks to a lot of elements of understaffing. You'll always be like, oh, if only we'd had an extra person. You're like, you'll never have everyone you want. You're always a few people short. And even of the people that showed up, one of them's dreaming about a holiday, the other one's on maternity leave or about to be, like, or whatever, or the other person's got to quit and they're doing job interviews after hours or during workout. So you never have a perfect team. So just write that off straight away. You've got the team you've got, lead them. And then that second part is look at their culture. Who are they? And there is no one style of leadership that'll work for everything. There's a few traits of good leaders that'll work in most situations, but there's no one style. And I look at some of the failures of what we did and didn't do in Afghanistan and Iraq at different times. And a lot of that, and you've got the smartest and best leaders that our militaries and government apparatus have produced, but so often they just failed to understand the cultures they were leading, or what did that country actually want. Now, you can't, and this is where you start going down some rabbit holes. You go, well, the reason we had to go to Afghanistan is because the Taliban government of the day allowed Al-Qaeda, that allowed 9/11. You're like, so, okay, so we've got to intervene. So you can't just go, let's just do it the way they want to do it, because the way they did it ended up kind of impacting the way we try, the West is trying to think. So that you kind of go into these funny rabbit holes, but at a point you start to go, well, what do those cultures and countries want? You'd be the same with Fiji. And Fiji's got some interesting historical divides then as well in terms of different cultures and linguistic groups and everyone and ethnic groups that have been mixed in together. And now so you now can't just run it the way it could have been run. You go, well, you've now got a 50-50 split. You've kind of got to manage those two cultures. So you've got to lead today's Fiji. You can't just try and lead 1970s Fiji or something. And that part of it gets lost. So that's the best lesson I've ever learned in leadership out of all those different locations, is the more you can understand the history, not just the here and now, but the history of how did we get to this point, and now what does it need in terms of leadership. And the lessons out of watching how the local country governed itself, and then how we as an international coalition to try and aid that country or tell that country what to do, how we led that effort, and then how it didn't work. And then you've got the bigger lessons out of Afghanistan with the way we set up the government of Afghanistan under our democratic principles and everything. The joke used to just be that the president of Afghanistan is the president of Kabul. It doesn't take into account the rest of it. And then the lawyer jirgas and there are the tribal systems of getting all the chiefs together. Like, that was the real thing, but it's still not a government. And that was something that I think got lost on us as well. They go, okay, we've got the lawyer jirga and these big kind of, if anyone doesn't know, like a jirga was like the Afghan tribal term for kind of just a big parliament, but those translations aren't quite correct. It's more just, it's a meeting of all the warlords and the chiefs and anyone that's kind of got a stake in something, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a government in the way we have it. It's not a democratic system. It's just a chance that everyone gets together and can voice opinions and maybe come to some sort of consensus, but it's not binding, and it doesn't mean that everyone now goes away and goes, oh, we're doing it that way. And that stuff I think got lost at times when it comes out of what's happening on the ground and then filters back to the West, where from our version, and this is where then education becomes so important, that if the only lens we can look at another country through is the lens of our own, and we only understand an advanced modern democracy with all advanced welfare support and all sorts of things that we have, it's straight away you go, oh, another country, they are the same. So if you talk to a 14-year-old kid from Australia who's gone through our education system, they might have learnt about other cultures and things, but they won't really have an understanding of another government system or another nation other than the way Australia works, unless they've come from, what is it, half of Australia got a parent born overseas, I don't know, rabbit holes. And that stuff becomes really important. So the more you can then understand all the different types of governments, all the different parts of history that have led to the way we govern and exist and the way humans and that lead, you can then start to really unpack it and really do a good job of it. The other risk is becoming too academic and going too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I want to shift from Pakistan and Iraq and Solomons and all the great work that you did there to Antarctica as a station leader, because that is like poles apart now. Born in Fiji. The first thing when I started reading your book, I'm like, why did he think going to Antarctica was a great idea given how bloody cold it is out there? Right. So you went from deployment into a war zone to being a station leader. Let's start with, because a lot of our listeners probably have never been to Antarctica and never intend to go there. What's it like living there?
Well, first of all, to all your listeners, if you ever get the chance, jump at it. It is the most breathtaking and spectacular place on Earth. And I've never met anyone that's been there that says anything other than that. Experiences may vary, but no one will ever question that it's worth getting a chance to get down there and see it, because it is a completely different planet. What's it like living down there? It's tough. So inherently, the environment is inhospitable and it's the only continent that was never inhabited by humans, because there is nothing there to sustain human life. And even in the wintertime, there's not a lot of wildlife that even lives on the continent, goes out to sea, or, like emperor penguins and other species are so adapted to that environment that they can't exist anywhere else. They can only live in the cold down there. So the wildlife is incredible, but the actual continent itself, it's 90% of the world's fresh water, frozen in ice, white, and white desert is the term. And it is just a barren white landscape for thousands and thousands of kilometers. There are some absolutely then spectacular mountain ranges and rocky regions, which tends to be where we have the stations, on the ice-free rocky regions. and then close to the coast. So there's a number of inland stations. Australia doesn't maintain a permanent inland station. We've got some inland work, and that, I mean, there is nothing more desolate than an inland Antarctic station. You'll just have this couple of buildings. You'll have an accommodation module, a generator shed, some solar panels, and you'll have some different scientific arrays and stuff around, and then nothing in every direction of white. But the thing is, it can be tempting to go, oh wow, and people will look at all the photos and go, oh, it looks spectacular, and it does on the good days. So on a good day, the height of summer, I've been in Antarctica when it's rained, and it's 4 or 5 degrees and it's raining. Now it's not real rain, it's sleet, but you're like, oh wow, it's raining, which is very rare in Antarctica, and not necessarily a direct climate change thing like that. It's happened. It does happen at the height of summer. You'll get a bit of rain, or minutes of rain, and yet the next day or even hours later, the temperature can then drop to -10 or -15 and have 100-kilometer-an-hour winds. So the changes in weather are phenomenally quick and can be catastrophically different. And that's stuff that can catch you out if you don't have the right gear and equipment. And I mean, in this day and age, the forecasting is actually remarkably good. The Antarctic forecasts that we get from Bureau of Met are phenomenal. So that does give us a heads up of like, hey, yep, it might be 4 degrees and raining now, but this is a part of a frontal system. You're going to have this warm front, and then behind that is a catastrophic blizzard that's going to come through, and so batten down the hatches. So you spend a lot of time just relashing gear and preparing for blizzards, and then digging stuff out after a blizzard. And
you're not selling it, David. You're not selling it at all.
I mean, one of the first chapters of the book talks about one of the best days I've ever had down there was flying across glaciers in helicopters at midnight. So midnight in Antarctic summer, the sun doesn't set; it just hovers around the horizon in this kind of 1 or 2 hour long sunset before the sun then just goes back up again. And some of those days or nights when you're flying across at not overly high off the deck as well, we're looking for crevasses in different areas to land to set up camps, and you're flying around looking at some of the most spectacular scenery. And often on a warm day, again, you'll have waterfalls of melt kind of coming off the glaciers as they then fall into the water. So you'll have these 200 or 300 foot high glacial waterfalls cascading down the front of a sheer ice cliff into the open ocean where there's whales and seals and everything below, and you're flying around in helicopters. So those days are definitely
magical.
Yeah.
So why were you deployed there in 2018? And as we all know, we were all about to get shut down, which you didn't know about. So when you deployed, how long were you supposed to be there for?
Yeah, so I deployed in October 2019 was when I went on the long trip to Davis that ended up going a little bit longer than expected. Now, that was we were the 73rd rotation of Australia's continual presence in Antarctica. So now we run 3 continental stations in Antarctica: Davis, Casey, and Mawson. And over the 70 odd years of that program, up until that point, it had become pretty routine. Now, obviously in the earlier days, it was very, very sparse, but by 2019, the rotation and the cycle had become pretty good in terms of recruiting, training, equipping, and getting everyone ready. And the mixture of scientists and then people like myself who've come from other professions, they say, hey, you'd be a good station leader. Here's some training. Here's some stuff. And I had a team of mechanics, cooks, weather observers, data scientists or electrical engineers, plumbers, all the electricians, trades teams, and then a bunch of scientists in there as well that come from the universities. But it had a good system to it of like, all right, you'll go down. And we knew that there'd be about 100 people that would go down on the ship for the summer of 2019 and 20, but 24 of us would stay on for the winter. So we knew it was a 12-month contract, and that was how it was sold to us. And for the years prior to that, it had pretty much gone to plan. And we were at the tail end of the operational life of the Australian icebreaker, Aurora Australis. And that ship had been in service for 30 years. And we were that was the last season it was going to work for the program before a new ship that was being built, the RSV Noina, was going to be commissioned and come and pick us up on the maiden voyage. So it had this old and new changeover period, which, if it hadn't been for COVID, would have been fine, and it could have gone to plan. But unlucky for us, as we rolled into 2020 and the lockdowns and everything happened back here, and COVID took over, the Aurora Australis was able to come back and pick up all of the summering team. So all the scientists and a number of other tradies and others that have been there for these summer projects when we do all the work. but it left the 24 of us there into the winter. And we last saw that ship in March 2020 was the last time I visited Antarctica. And from that moment on was when it really started to change. And it was a weekly kind of grind of like, okay, we've got a lot of work to do here to winterize the station and keep it going. But we kept one eye back on life at home and reading the newspapers or reading the online editions of newspapers, starting to see the writing on the wall of like, oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, it's kind of a good novelty in that early phase, or I call the kind of sourdough phase of lockdown, where you're like, okay, this is fun, but is this going to have an impact on us getting home? And eventually it did.
And you're leading a team of 24 at that point in time, David. You get told you can't go back. You're watching what's happening in Australia and other parts of the world. You've got family back home that you're worried about. How did you manage the emotions, the frustration, the isolation, the fear, the concern of the 24 people around you, plus yourself, to get through that time?
Yeah, it was an interesting roller coaster. So we found out officially just after midwinter. So 23rd of June, 2020 was when we found out officially, hey, you're not going to go home in November as planned. We can't, the new ship's not going to be ready. The old ship's offline, and we can't do we can't get the planes into your location. So you're going to have to stay until sometime into 2021, probably around March, April. But there was a very live chance we would have stayed even longer, and that would have been a whole different story. But for us, there was 24 of us with 24 different ways to manage each, yourself individually. And then as a group, as much as, yes, I had a big say in how we managed that as a group, the group itself is 24 grown-up, mature, professional people. So there was a fine balance between organized fun from myself and the other members of the leadership group to go, okay, we've got to do these formal events, and then here's the formal plan for getting through the additional summer and the additional overtime. And we were able to do things like work with the room, work with the team, and go, okay, how are we going to change? We've set up to run this for 12 months based on fatigue management and kind of endurance and mental resilience. Now that it's going to be longer, we had to change the kind of tempo a little bit, or change when the tempo would adjust. So we were able to kind of adjust that to the season a bit, so that when it was the better weather of November, December, we were able to kind of work slightly less to make the most of those last days of great weather and great conditions, knowing that we'd have to kick the can down the road to kind of work harder in the earlier part of this, like the later part of the summer. So we were able to adjust that, which was great formal kind of dealing with resilience. But the other part of it then was letting the community do its own thing in terms of freedoms and choice. It was giving people more autonomy to go out on field trips and enjoy themselves. And then as well, at one point when we got to about the 12-month anniversary and a number of things that you go to your toolkit of resilience that we'd all talked about before we left, about, okay, make sure you've got strategies and plans, and people are like, oh yeah, play a bit of music, read a book, go to the gym, do some stuff. Your standard things to help give yourself a mental holiday. But we found collectively a lot of that wasn't working anymore. So
was that because of the time frame, David, and the uncertainty?
So. Yeah, I just think like it gets to a point where what was working stops working. Law of diminishing returns or whatever it is. And so we got everyone, we sort of hit pause where we could, or did some core work only for a week that we then called Wellness Week. And we're able to stop work at about 4:00, which then left us with 2 hours before dinner time to run different sessions, really focused around, okay, what do you do to manage yourself? Can you run a group session for anyone that wants to go? And most of them were pretty much attended by everyone, to learn, okay, what's Bob doing? Well, what's Phil doing? Like who's doing what? And the funniest one was one of the guys was right into Tai Chi, which got a lot of laughs of like, oh, okay, never really tried Tai Chi before, but we all turned up and you're standing there doing Tai Chi in the lounge room. And that stuff was great, because you go, okay, maybe it works. It's working for him, could work for me, and give it a shot and try something else, have an open mind to what everyone else was doing. And that gave it a good reset. And it also helped everyone realize how hard it was, and that we're all in the same boat with things not working, frustrations playing out in different ways. And I did spend a lot of time working one-on-one with people that then, as a leader, is quite unsighted. A number of people don't really see it, and they don't because people go, I don't want people to know that we're doing this or this is happening. So yet at the same time, not a lot of secrets on an Antarctic station of 24 people. So it had this strange flow to it.
What about things like supplies? Did you have enough food and supplies, or did you have to ration all of that?
We did. So one of the contingencies around the Antarctic station, so the ship will visit each station once a year, once a season, but we oversupply them for contingencies such as this. Now, in the modern age, we'd never really had to dig into the contingencies in this way, but we did have 2 years worth of food. And if we'd gone on to fuel rationing and other aspects, we could have eked out further years of food and fuel. And there's emergency containers and things that are set up. And this was a great one. So one of our emergency containers, which is full of like flour and sugar. So you go, so, okay, if everything else burns down, you've got a container, you can make bread and cookies and you'll get by until we can come and get you or something. But it also had all this old vintage, like 70s era Antarctic gear. And we got the order that came back and said, hey, you've got these 2 emergency containers. One of them's now end of life and it's got all this old equipment in it. Can you just tag that container, weigh it and put it down on the wharf, get rid of it, and it will ship it home? And we're like, what's in it? They're like, oh, it's like old vintage gear. Like, don't worry about it. And we're like,
no, we want to worry about it.
Oh yeah. And then the call went across the radio. It was just like someone like opened the container and they're like, if anyone wants to come to the 70s Antarctic op shop, now's your chance. And we're like, oh, what? And just spanners just drop and everyone just bolts up to this container. And we had a field day just putting on all this old like sledging gear and these mittens, and some of it was better than the modern gear in terms of it's like real fur and things, rather than, not a big fan of fur, but hey, if it's already there and it's cold in Antarctica, you're like, yeah, you're going to use it. You're going to use it. And then so we're like, oh, vintage night in the bar. We're like, oh yeah, for sure. So we then got dressed up in all this vintage gear and had a night, kind of vintage night. And so you make your own fun in the moments that happen. So there was a lot of formal occasions that we'd commemorate and do things, but some of the real good memories were these impromptu, just hilarious moments where you take some time to have a laugh as a group and enjoy it.
You do have some wonderful videos online, and I will put the links in the show notes. But there's a great one that you did on YouTube where you talked about, staying safe and sanitizing your hands and, safe distancing and all, which is pretty cool, really, done in the Antarctica, which is quite fun.
Yeah, that was a fun day. Yeah.
How did you get support, David? I mean, here you are, particularly around the uncertainty, communicating that to the team, keeping them connected with each other. Where did you get your support from as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this one. So in terms of your own support as a leader, and in some ways, when you're in a leadership role in a crisis, you don't have time for yourself and you won't. You'll be dedicated to the problem and the team and the next problem, which is classic and great. It's your job. That's why you're in that position. So I spent a lot of time doing that. But at the moments you go, geez, I'm having burnout. So part of that was I had a really good deputy station leader. So she was the wintering chef. She had a lot of Antarctic experience, and her and I were very different personalities and very different backgrounds. And she was the perfect choice for deputy. And the best decision I made from day one to the end was her as the deputy. So that helped a lot, that she backed me up. She never tried to do my job or tell me how to do the job the way it were. And I never tried to tell her how to do her job at all either. And so we just had this great delineation of roles that we'd never really had to specify. We just knew it, of like, that, cool, that's your job, that's my job. And the two of them worked together to back each other up. And I'd bounce ideas off her that I knew were going to be unpopular, e.g., hey, we're all staying longer. She's the first person I told to discuss how we tell the group that. And same, she'd give me feedback on things that weren't going well. But also I knew I could trust her. So when I was struggling, I could go to her with problems. But then there were some problems where I wouldn't go. I'm like, oh, that's not one that I'm going to go to her with. And I had the station doctor, was another one who's sort of impartial. He's there, but he's not necessarily part of the reporting structures. So he was another one that on certain issues I could talk to the doctor about, and that's on station, so immediate. And then there was a few others in the leadership group who I had relationships with that could seesaw between, yeah, you're in a leadership role, but also we're still just, two people, similar age, similar experiences, struggling down here. And you could always have that equal. So you could use your own team at times on common issues of, hey, we're all in the same boat. Bigger than that, though, was wanting to speak to and taking time to speak to the other station leaders. So there was the other Antarctic stations, and then former station leaders too. So people that had been in my chair and in the shoes of a station leader before were the ones I really lent on when times got tough and things started to feel like they were failing, or I felt like I was failing. And that's natural in a leadership role in a crisis. You will feel uncertain, anxious, like it's falling apart, and you perceive reality. It can get really, really tricky, especially in a place like Antarctica. And that stuff, you go, I don't want to go to my team with this, or I don't want to go to anyone on station. I need to talk to someone off station. And it would be previous station leaders, and even going to the history books of reading old station logs, or reading as far back as Shackleton and Scott and the heroic age, that so many of the problems that happen in Antarctica or happen in leadership, you're not the first one and you won't be the last. And I mean, I am a history buff, so that kind of helps, that you can just look back to historical examples and be like, oh, well, if they got through it. And I'd call these old station leaders up and be like, oh, hey, I'm Dave, I'm down at Davis at the moment. And they're like, oh yeah, I've seen you on TV or something, and I've heard about you, and how's it all going? And I'd be like, hey, yeah, all that, but great. I need to talk to you. Like in 1997, I've seen in the log here, you had this incident happen. I've had something similar, and I just don't know what to do. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh, that's hilarious that happened now. And like, oh, we all laugh about it. And I'm like, really? Because at the time it seems pretty rough. They're like, oh yeah, no, it's fine. You'll work it out. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, if they all got through it, we can get through it. And that was the stuff that got me through. And on the flip side of that, we had some other funny examples of where some of the formal structures, and you'll see this in workplaces, and I do work with a lot of different workplaces out there, and most of them are smart enough now to realize the flaws in this. But for a while there, you'd see a lot of workplaces would go, oh, hey, if you've got any problems, or you're feeling stressed or whatever, we've got a sticker on the wall of a phone number that you can call. And that's
support. Yeah.
Exactly. And that shows that we care, because we have a sticker on a wall, and you're like, that is terrible. The sticker on the, show that you care by caring, and care as a leader, care as a team, care as a company, care about your people, ask them how. Don't say like, oh, if you've got a problem, just call the number on the wall. Like, if you've got a problem, come and tell me, or tell someone. If I'm the problem, go to this person. And that was some of the structures we had of like, if I'm the problem, go to the deputy station leader. If she's the problem, go to the doctor. If he's also the problem, go to someone else. Because nothing against ELPs and ERP, all that, like, they are good systems to have when the other structures aren't there. But the first point of call should still be
the leader,
and the team members, or the deputy leaders, or the welfare officers, or whatever your company's got. And that frustrates me. So, and we had some great stories of people that did use some of those external lines, and they then end up in my office. I'm like, oh, how'd you go with the phone call? And they're like, well, she suggested I go outside for a walk, and you look out the window and it's 200 knot winds and blowing blizzard sideways, and you're like, oh yeah,
how did that go?
Yeah, how'd that go? Yeah.
It's very true though. I think sometimes leaders get so busy doing the stuff that they do that they forget that human connection is still so critical and so important. Just on that, you were in a slightly different position. I mean, I lead a team of people, and if I have a bad day, I can go home and I can have a drink and watch something on Netflix and come back to work the next morning, and I've sorted it out. You were living with the people you lead 24/7. How did that go when you had a bad day?
Well, it certainly changes you certainly put a lot more thought into how is this decision or announcement going to be received, because you're going to have to go and have dinner with that group, and then breakfast, and live with them for that. So you put a lot more thought into that, but at the same time, you still got to make tough decisions, or be the face of bad news. So that was part of it. From the get-go, though, we have really strict and a really good system of delineation between work and play, and just sort of rest hours. So you have this, we work from kind of 7:30 to 6 p.m. was more or less the core working hours. And there was some fudge in that, and different groups and different teams and different shifts. And that was a constant conversation and battle as well, that I could do a whole other podcast on. But that was more or less the core work hours. And outside of that, if you're going up to someone after dinner, or on a Sunday, or on a designated day off, or whatever, or if they clearly are sitting there in their pajamas, and it might be 2:00 on a Tuesday, but you don't know that they were up all night fixing an engine or something, and now they're having a day off because they didn't sleep or whatever. They're sitting there with a cup of tea and their Jimmy Jams reading a book. don't go up to them and be like, oh, by the way, blah, 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 blah. Like this vehicle's broken, or I need you to do this job. And like, go up and say, hey, excuse me. I know you're busy. I got a work question and I don't think it can wait. 99% of the time they'll be like, yeah, that's fine. Just, yeah, what is it? And then they'll triage it in their head. But it was that courtesy to, not, and look, I broke that rule. Everyone broke that rule at some point. And the quickest way to get your head snapped off was to break that rule of just walk up to someone in the dinner queue or at the bar or in the gym with a stupid work question. And you're like, mate, what are you doing? Like, put it on the notice board, put it in an email, put it on a Post-it note on my desk. But right now, I don't give a stuff.
I don't care.
Yeah. Unless the building is on fire or it's a critical safety issue, it can wait. And that was the best way to manage it. And certainly though, there would be times where you're frustrated or something's gone wrong and you go, okay, I'll go to the gym and try and use that as a tool to help reset my mental health. And you go into the gym and the person that's been annoying you is in the gym on the machine you want, or, doing curls in the squat rack. And you're like, come on, like get out of here. And I was as guilty of that as any. Like people would not want to see the boss in the gym. And so you've got this cabin fever issue, and getting your own personal space is really tricky down there. And you're lucky enough to have your own room in the winter, but the walls are pretty thin. The doors are really heavy because they're all fireproof. So, door slamming and some of these issues they're how the big issues manifest in the little things with door slamming and dishwashers and stuff.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of three things being self-awareness, flexibility, and adaptability. And I imagine that those three things, you would have gone into that environment, all 24 of you would have gone into that environment with a lot of that. Did you see those skill sets just absolutely, grow?
They're the sort of skill sets that if you don't have them on day one, they don't tend to grow. So they're certainly the things we look for when we're recruiting people for Antarctica, but not perfect. And self-awareness, it's not as common as you'd hope it is, or it can have variations. Self-awareness is a really good one. And the other one I'd probably add to that would be motivation. When I look back on who did well, and it's hard to pick. If you lined up the 24 people just on resume or just on age, demographics, and a few things, you'd do a pretty good job of picking who would go well and who wouldn't. But there'd be some outliers where you're like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have picked that they would in terms of if I had to grade everyone and give everyone a score out of 10 to say how they went in terms of resilience and adaptability and all these different things, some of the people that I'd give a 10 to and others I'd give a 1 to, you'd be like, match them to the resume and you'd be like, oh, that's crazy. And you're like, well, that's what happened. And the bigger factor in all that, I call it like the wagon wheel of motivation, is why are they there? Why did they go to Antarctica? And why anything becomes a huge part of it when you get pushed. And for us, I think the ones that were at the higher end of the performance, and overall, everyone did incredibly well. Everyone got through it and we all came home safely and we all came home and we were all still talking to each other. So you go, wow, what an outcome. But those that I think did better or look back on it as a more positive experience were the ones that set out on an adventure, that part of their journey to Antarctica wasn't just, oh, it's a job or it's something interesting or I just want to go and see penguins or whatever it is. Your bucket listers. And we get them in the program and everyone's got a slice of their motivational wagon wheel that's bucket list of like, cool, go to Antarctica, bucket list, tick off the 7th continent, see some penguins, do something crazy. But you want a bigger part of that wagon wheel to be pure, I want a professional and an individual and group adventure. And for those of the team that saw that, when it got harder or when it became this, hey, you're staying longer, you're now going to end up being on one of the longest Australian Antarctic expeditions in modern history with all these different twists and turns along the way. When your motivation was, hey, I wanted an adventure. And this helped me on some dark days where you're like, you wanted to be a leader in a tough situation. Well, geez.
Doesn't get any tougher than
this. And you just go like, oh, well, you wanted this, you idiot. So deal with it. And that helps you. And I could see that in a number of the team, that those that were there for the adventure, when it had these twists and turns, for them, like unconsciously or subconsciously, they're like, great, this is what I wanted. Now, at the time, you might be like, oh, geez, I would have rather go home on time. But hey, you've got this second opportunity, this second summer in Antarctica, and got to make the most of it.
Mm. I want to touch on climate change a little bit. What is Antarctica's role in the global climate change? And what are our greatest risks in the next, I don't know, 10, 15, 100 years?
Oh, great question, and big question. So Antarctica's role in climate change relates to Antarctica's role in the climate. So, like I said before, Antarctica holds 90% of the world's fresh water frozen in ice, and it regulates, the southern hemisphere and the way, and then the globe is regulated by that Antarctic ice mass. Helps with the ocean currents and look, I am not a scientist, so I'll absolutely make a dog's breakfast of some of this, but hopefully I get the key points across. It helps regulate the globe, and then the Antarctic polar currents and all these other elements help regulate the way the oceans work and the way the weather systems work and everything as well. So that's all regulated. And if you think about it in your house, if your house at one end of the room or the middle of the room being the equator, you've got a fireplace, but on the two walls, you've got massive ice bricks, but they're far enough away that the heater in the middle doesn't quite melt them. But now you've got one of those ice bricks, the Arctic, has melted significantly. It's now like a little block on the ground and a pool of water. And you're like, well, didn't that used to be a big ice block? You're like, I think granddad said it was. And at the other end, you got the Antarctic ice sheet that still kind of looks pretty good. And you go, okay, well, at least we've still got that one good ice block. But that's now starting to melt as well. So the importance of what we're doing down there studying, and this recent summer I was down with a team studying a place called the Denman Glacier, which is a huge glacier covering nearly the sort of feeding area of is about the size of Tasmania. So it's an absolutely massive area. And we're out there studying that, putting in different instruments and taking ice core samples and everything, because we know it's melting faster than it should or than it historically has, but we don't quite have enough data on some elements of it. So we're out there with a team of 42 people to get those data points and understand why is this region, or how fast is this region retreating, how fast is it moving, and then what impact is that going to have? Because you get these crazy anomalies where, because the ice is melting faster or potentially melting faster than it should be, and it does have a natural variation of over thousands and millions of years, things melt and freeze and all sorts of shit, is that you get these anomalies then, because as that fresh water melts, that'll actually cool the immediate ocean areas around Antarctica. So you'll now have areas where you'll have increased sea ice, which will then, you can look at the data and be like, well, you can use it for counter arguments to say, well, there's more sea ice. Like, yeah, there is this year, but then for the 3 years preceding that, there was less Antarctic sea ice than ever. And that meant that the glacier could melt faster. And then it just had a year where that water kind of didn't dissipate or created a situation where it could refreeze. And unfortunately, for the last 2 years, the extant Antarctic sea ice has been far below, and you Google this stuff and have a look at the graphs, where those dots are on the plot are so far outside the standard deviation of the last 100 or so years of sea ice data that you go, that can't be a natural deviation. You look at these dots and you're like, oh, wow, that is just like they're right down the bottom. And that's now becoming the problem. So that's what we're down there to, the sea ice and glacial melt is probably the main focus of it. What's difficult is that Antarctica is so much bigger than everyone really thinks it is, other than the scientists that study it. Getting out there and getting to these regions, like to go and study the Denman Glacier, it was a 3-year project. There's a team about to head down now for the 3rd and final year of it. I'm not part of it this year, taking a year off. But that project took, a couple of years of planning, millions of dollars of funding from University of Tasmania and Monash University and the Australian Antarctic Division as well to get it off the ground, to get out there and study this place. And you have some funny discussions with the scientists and you're like, okay, so what are you looking for to prove this? And they get questions all the time about like, oh, well, how can you, what's the smoking gun? And they're like, we already know it's melting faster than it should be. It's melting. Like, it's clear. We know. Look at the data, look at the science. We're just trying to get more and more to get it through the heads of people that don't see it. And there's some great articles now that I've seen recently, the greenery. So there's regions of Antarctica that I talked about earlier in this podcast that, the rocky ice-free areas are where we have the stations. So we have been going there for around 100 years to these locations. And you can go, and this is where reading the old journals are great, because you'll read a journal from 100 years ago when they landed at that rocky area, and they'll say, I'll put on the British accent sort of thing. They're like, oh, yes, a barren, desolate plain with absolutely no traces of life to be seen. And then you look at and so you've got this journal entry from Shackleton or someone, and you look at that now and you go, well, there's moss and there's lichen and there's all this stuff that wasn't here 100 years ago because it's warmed by a degree or two. So now there's moss. And I even talk about it, I joke about this in the book. Moss is probably one of the least exciting, unless you study moss is probably the least exciting thing that people want to see a glacier carving in half or something to prove climate change. You're like, yeah, well, you look at your feet, and if there's moss where there wasn't moss 100 years ago, that probably says
we've got a problem.
We've got a problem. And it's not the smoking gun, but it's the little
it's a first sign, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've had incredible adventures there, and you've written a book, 537 Days, and you talk about in your book about your adventures there. The book can be bought in all good bookstores or online.
Correct. Yep. Should be still out there. Airport bookshops tend to have it as well.
Airport bookshops. Yeah. I haven't got a copy, but I have seen it online. And I actually want to pick something up that I had written down, because in the foreword of the book, 537 Days, you have the Governor General who writes the foreword of the book, which is very impressive. But he talks about loneliness of command. And when I read that piece, I quite often reflect on leaders talk about how it's so lonely at the top. And here you are, you've probably been to one of the loneliest places on the planet you can go to with 24 people stuck there for 537 days, and you've written a book about it. But talk to me about that loneliness piece and remoteness piece from a leadership perspective and how you overcame that.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, thanks to Dave Hurley, the former Governor General of Australia, who was kind enough to write the foreword for it, and he kind of understood the crux of the main kind of focus of the book is what is it like to be not just a story about what's it like to spend 537 days at the Antarctic station, but one of my main focuses of the book was to bring the reader inside my own head of the uncertainty and the challenges and the loneliness of what is it like to lead a station. And even a number of my team who helped with elements of the book. So there was a number of them who were happy to be involved and helped kind of bounce ideas around. And one of them, when he some of the feedback, he's like, geez, I never knew you either saw it this way or you understood. He's like, geez, you had a lot going on in your head. And I'm like, yep. But part of the job of a leader is then you try and mask all of that. But at times others they're like, oh yeah, I knew you were having a tough week that week. And you're like, yep, yeah, that's true. It's written all over your face. You can't hide too much. And yeah, so the loneliness is one of the biggest challenges in leadership. And there were certainly nights and days and weeks where I'd just sit there going like, I've got to solve this problem, or like, there's no one else. There isn't a historic example that's working. There's no one else to speak to, or the people you'd speak to would give you advice or opinions that aren't going to work or aren't that helpful. And you just sit there and be like, well, I want it. And that's where then coming back to that motivation piece of you wanted this challenge. Find a way through it. And you're not alone in that you've got 23 people around you in the same boat, and key people like the deputy station leader and the doctors and others there who are there, who, even if you can't tell them the full problem, or you just, for whatever reason, it's professionally inappropriate or whatever it is, you can tell them enough that, okay, we're in this together. And that is the stuff that as a leader, you don't necessarily have to let your there's a lot of talk now around vulnerability in leadership, and it is really important to show that you're still human and you're vulnerable. And if you don't know, you don't admit that you don't know, but still give people a plan or demonstrate to them that, okay, I don't have a plan right now. And certainly when we got told, hey, you're staying longer, we didn't have a plan. We're like, yep, we don't know when we're going home, don't know how we're getting home, and we don't even know what home's going to look like. However, what I can give you is how we as a group can get on the front foot. We can reframe this problem. We can do what we can here. We can control. Sphere of control is one of those, the cliched method to get through this stuff. And you start to go, okay, well, what can we control? We control the second summer. And giving people a plan and giving people hope is really important in leadership in a crisis, and an avenue of like, right, we're going to do this. And it might not stick to that plan exactly, or that plan might not have a lot of detail, but the hope that, no, there's a way through this. And I'm off topic there with the loneliness piece, but it all kind of brings it together of, okay, you're alone, but as a group. And even then, and I reckon this would be the same if like you're watching a series like Alone. The thing that I've considered trying to do something like that, but you go, if you're out there alone in the wilderness, knowing that there's other contestants would be a huge part of helping you through it, because you go, if I'm still here, someone else is still there. And until they come and pick me up and say, you've won, I'm not alone because there's someone else in that same boat. And that's something that can help with the loneliness. If there have been other leaders, there have been others in these situations, and they got through to tell the story, and I will get through to tell the story.
Great way to end this discussion, David. Thank you so much for your time. All the best in your next, are you going back?
No plans at the moment. I'm taking this will be my first summer or first full summer in Australia since before the pandemic. So
you won't know yourself. You might get some warm weather.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and good luck.
Thanks for having me.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.